Okay, so I showed you how to do the sunlight system, but I also want to show you, based on lighting theory, I want to show you another way to do your lighting. Okay, remember, you're going to use the standard lights. Don't use those photometric lights. Standard lights. Okay, so a typical lighting setup that we could use, say for some reason that you were the sunlight system didn't work or it wasn't applicable and you want to light your scene. So I'm going to show you how I would light this scene. Now remember, we're inside this volcano, which is this giant tube that I put a taper on. Okay, we're inside this. And, whoops, why don't we do that, because it's, oh, we'll put a camera in here shortly. I'll show you this, do the camera. Okay, so we're in here, and I want to light this scene. What I would do is, I'd come in here with a target spot, and let's just put one in here. Now, this is going to be contingent upon where my camera is going. You're going to want to place your lights where your camera's going to be, and since we haven't talked about cameras yet, we're just going to assume that the camera is looking this way, that the camera is, the person with the camera is right here looking into the scene this way. Okay, so, and then we'll put a camera in there doing exactly that. Okay, so I put the light in here, and you can see it's down on the ground. And I want to pick it up. And it is a targeted light. There's the target. And you see the light itself and the target both have their own ability to move independently of each other. Or you can select both. Just hold down your control key. And you can select and move the light as a whole. Okay. So I generally put, because for the most part, all of our lights, if you think about it, our sun, our overhead lights, our lamps, most of our lights are a little bit over our heads, or, you know, eye level. So I just put mine roughly, here's my character, and I just put it roughly over his head and pointed down. Now, when I render out this scene, you see, obviously I have a spotlight, and I don't want that spotlight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it and go to my Modify tab, and then I'm going to come under, oh, the shadows are off. Let's start with this. General parameters. The shadows are off for this. When you set up a light, your key light, your main light, the main source of your light should cast your shadows, because that's how it works in the real world. And if you do anything else, and I'm not saying don't ever do anything else, but it needs to be intentional. That's the key to breaking any of the rules of our principles and elements of design. If you're going to break them for a reason, you need to have a purpose, right? You shouldn't just break them to break them, because then it just doesn't work. There needs to be a purpose for breaking them. And then if you're going to break them, you want it to be very clear that you did it on purpose for effect. Because if you just slightly break the rule, people think you don't know what you're doing and you messed up. It's just, because what happens is when artists break rules, they break them big. And so that becomes the expectation. For instance, in this case, say I want to create a very surreal lighting scene, and I want to do that on purpose. That's my purpose. Surreality. I want people to feel like it's surreal. I know you guys have seen movies where they do dream sequences, and they do something to change it so that you're clear it's a dream sequence, unless they're trying to fool you, and then they don't, which I absolutely hate those things. It drives me nuts, because dreams are never exactly like reality where you left off, but that's a whole other thing, and I'll spare you guys my theory on that. So for this, say I just want it to be realistic, okay? I'm not trying to break any rules. So what's going to happen is my key light is going to be my brightest light. And based on where this is, looking at this, that might be enough. It might be too much, but for now we're just going to leave it at 1. And it's going to cast my shadows. So under general parameters, for my first light that I've put in here, I'm going to turn it on for shadows. And under the shadow map, you have different options. anything that's ray traced means that it literally traces a ray of light from when it comes out of the source and hits an object and then bounces around the room, because that's what it does. And as it hits objects, the objects that it hits initially will absorb some of the light and reflect other light. And that reflected light is our ambient light, and it bounces around the room until it's fully absorbed by all the objects. And that's why you can see in dark places that don't have direct light, is because of the ambient light in the room or in the space. And you can see this light right here is not showing any ambient light. It just falls off, just cuts off. But we can fix that. But so one of the ways we do that is by tracing a ray, literally tracing the ray of light as it bounces around. You usually ray trace shadows. You can use any of these actually. Area shadow, shadow map, advanced ray trace. The thing is this, it depends on your computer. These start to slow it down. You can work with any of these for this class, and you can leave it with the default if you want. But if you want to start doing advanced stuff and you have the memory in your computer to do that, you can do that. You can exclude things from being lit up. All you have to do is hit that exclude button. Tell it what you don't want it to light. Move it over into this category and tell it whether you don't want it to illuminate, or whether you don't want it to cast shadows, or whether you don't want it to do both. And this could be really cool for effect. Almost never use this, but I just like knowing that it's there. Okay, so shadows are on for this light, and let me re-render this to show you. Oops, it's going to do that one. Okay, so now we've got our shadows on. He wasn't casting a shadow before, now he is. Okay, so it starts to feel more three-dimensional. Let's go back to our light. All right, so I'm going to roll that up and get to intensity color attenuation. The multiplier is how bright your light is, and by default it's at 1. Every fraction of an increment, so every 0.1, either up or down, because you can reduce the multiplier or you can go up. Every fraction of an increment is exponential. So if you want this to be brighter, try 1.1 and see if that's bright enough. Now, if I was going to blow this scene out, I'm going to show you, because this is what happens. So if I use a multiplier somewhere around 4.5, let's see, it should blow it out. Yeah, it does, right? So it's way too bright, it's way too intense. So that number that you put in there for your multiplier is very sensitive. You can change the color of your lighting. I'm just going to do something very drastic so that it's very clear that I changed it. Okay, you'll really see it here. Pretty cool. But since we don't want the blue light, we want the warm light. When you're using a light that's just meant to represent warmth, you probably want to do something like this color. These colors tend to really make it look very gory and oversaturated. You want just a barely warm shade of beige. Like that. It's pretty nice. Now, because of, earlier we were using a brighter light, I might want to go a little more warm just because of the glow of the lava. And that becomes part of your decision as the artist. That's too much. I don't like that. It looks kind of sick. It's a little too red and a little too... All right, let's try that. It's okay, but I'm going to put more light in here and I can go back and change it. Okay. So, back to my light. All right, so you have types of decay. For now, don't use these. We'll talk about these when we get into the materials and lighting class next semester. Because this can really start to, if you get off on these numbers, you can really start to do some crazy things. For now, just leave it at none. And it'll be okay, because what we're going to do won't matter. When we get into talking about night lighting and stuff like that next semester, then you'll need this. Okay, so we're just going to leave it there for now. Then we're going to go to spotlight parameters. When we rendered this out, you could see the edge of the cone. If I hit overshoot, just check that box, overshoot, and then render it out, it gets rid of that edge of the cone. It just treats it like it's a source light. And you see the edge, we no longer have that edge of the cone. Okay, so this already looks a whole lot better. But it's just one light. So what I'm going to want to do is come in and put in my secondary light. Let me see if I want to show you anything else on this. Let's overshoot, and then we'll talk about some of these things later. These are atmospheres and effects. Those could be really cool. Okay, we're just starting with the basics for now. You can do a whole lot more to it, but I don't want to get too far down that road. Okay, I'm going to do a second spotlight, and I'm going to do it at between 90 and 130 degree angle from this light. It's my secondary light. Do about right there. And you want to pick it up off the ground to about the same height. Maybe a little bit lower, just to catch some of that ambient light bouncing off of objects. And when I select it and go to my general parameters, I want the shadows off. If I turn them on, you will get double shadows and it looks weird. And people will know something's off, and they'll be focused on something's off and not on what's going on in your scene. You can absolutely defy and break the rules of physics, but there still needs to be a sense of, people need to have a sense of, this is somewhat realistic, or this is somewhat resembling the world that I live in order to connect to it. If you break every single rule there is, people will feel very disconnected and mostly won't engage. So you still want to make sure you're following the basic rules of physics. Now, obviously, you can do things like have people defy the rules, a rule of physics, but you don't want them to defy everything. People won't be able to relate at all to your story. And so what I'm sharing with you is the things that you probably don't want to do anything with yet. You just want to follow the basic laws of lighting. And this is what we're going to do for this setup. And then as you learn the software, and then you start wanting to do things that are more artistic and more creative, I'll start giving you more ways, showing you more ways to do that. Okay? All right, so then for this one, we're going to leave the shadows off. And then for my intensity, I'm going to reduce my multiplier to 0.5, or 0.4, sorry. It's just the default set where you want to go for a test, and then you can make adjustments from there. And then again, I want to overshoot my light parameters. Okay, so now when I render out this scene, you see I have my base color, and now my secondary light, my base light, and then my secondary light has made my shadows see-through and transparent the way they are in real life. Before, without that secondary light, it made the shadows really hard, solid black, and they're not like that. You can see through shadows. And so the shadow here is much more realistic and much more, hey, no one's going to notice the shadows are off. Okay, so I probably want to adjust my lighting now that I have both lights in there. And we will continue that in the next video because I'm out of time here.